So I think that we can all pretty much agree that the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC is going to see us uncovering some of Queen Marika the Eternal's hidden away past. After all, the official description states that the Land of Shadow is where Marika first set foot. And director Hidetaka Miyazaki confirmed in a recent interview that the Land of Shadow is where Marika became a god, where the Erdtree was born, and the home of a unique culture that existed before the Erdtree. But another comment by Miyazaki from this same interview perhaps has even more ominous implications for the story as we know it. The title of the DLC itself hides a dark secret. I welcome you, Tarnished, to join this humble scholar as I go through some recent community theories and try to shed light on the hidden meaning of the Shadow of the Erdtree. So the basic premise of this video comes to us from Reddit user Lami1 in a lengthy but well-reasoned post that I'll link in the video description. In the post, he begins by highlighting a particular part of Miyazaki's interview with Japanese gaming outlet Famitsu, where they're discussing the title of the DLC. I'll provide my translation on screen, but I'll also link to the original Japanese in the video description. Interviewer: The absolute first thing I wondered about when the title was announced was the meaning of the subtitle, Shadow of the Erdtree. Miyazaki: Erdtree refers to the golden tree that appears in the main title. So, directly translating this, the DLC title means the golden tree's shadow. In the concept art we released in February, the tree rising from the left is the shadow of the golden tree, called the Shadow Tree. The DLC doesn't take place in the lands between, symbolized by the golden tree, but rather the Shadowlands, symbolized by the Shadow Tree. Also, there's a bit more hidden meaning in the title, but I think I'd like you all to find it by experiencing the actual game. And it's this last part in particular that begs the question. What hidden meaning could Miyazaki be referring to here? Well, Lami1 I think rightly points out that this could perhaps be referencing some wordplay that could be lost on you if you don't speak Japanese. But hey, I speak Japanese, so let me see what I can do to explain. The kanji used for shadow in the title is one that's read as kage, which is commonly used the same way as the word shadow in English, meaning the dark part that's created when a light is cast. But also similar to the English word shadow is that kage can have multiple varying interpretations. So for example, in the sentence, Mizu tamari ni utsutta kage ga mieta, reflections could be seen in the puddles. Here, kage could be interpreted as reflections rather than just shadows. And as both Lami1 and an excellent blog post by a Japanese user named Gyokuro point out, kage can be used in a more figurative sense to mean something spiritually dark, or a concealed or hidden aspect of something. So it seems fair to conclude that these varying interpretations of shadow can lead us to the hidden meaning that Miyazaki is referring to, especially considering that the other part of the title, Erdtree, doesn't really leave much room for alternative interpretation. In short, this provides us with the basis to speculate that the DLC could see us uncovering the dark and until now concealed history surrounding the birth of the Erdtree itself. And as I alluded to earlier, considering that in this same interview Miyazaki confirms that the Erdtree was born in the Land of Shadow, this guess becomes even more plausible. But what sort of metaphorically dark shadow was cast by the Erdtree's birth? Well, let's go back to Lami1. I'll be right to the point. My theory is that the secret lies in how the Erdtree was grown, namely through mass sacrificial rituals, where a huge number of people were killed for the well-being of the tree. And while this might sound a bit far-fetched, this isn't without some considerable support from in-game text and lore. So let's look at the evidence together, and you can let me know what you think. So as we all know, as part of the establishment of the Golden Order, Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, making it so that those blessed by grace do not die. Instead, their souls are drawn into the Erdtree, from which they can eventually return. The process of returning from the Erdtree actually isn't super well documented, unless you count how our Tarnished is able to respawn. But there do seem to be some other examples. We for instance learn of Headless Lutel, who sacrificed her life so that in death, she could continue to protect a soulless demigod until their revival. But in contrast to this cycle of returning from the tree, we also know from multiple pieces of in-game text of a funerary practice called Erdtree burial, which involved physically interring those deemed worthy in the Erdtree root-permeated catacombs and the heroes' graves found throughout the lands between. Presumably a practice that would see the assimilation of both soul and vessel into the Erdtree. Scanning every item description and piece of dialogue in the game, I was able to locate 3 documented cases of Erdtree burial. Lutel, who I mentioned earlier, was actually granted this honor for her heroism. We also learn of Banished Knight Oleg, one of the 2 knights known as the Wings of the Storm. After his banishment, he attracted the notice of the Grace-given Lord. And later, having slain 100 traitors as the Lord's hand, Oleg earned the hero's honor of Erdtree burial. And last we know of ancient dragon knight Kristoff, an honorable knight of Leyndell, who is also a devout worshipper of the ancient dragons. After the first defense of Leyndell, Kristoff earned the hero's honor of Erdtree burial for the feat of capturing Godefroy the Grafted. Although these are the only 3 cases of Erdtree burial mentioned explicitly, looking at the roots in the heroes' graves shows that this could have been a pretty common practice, as they are littered with countless bodies in the process of being assimilated into the Erdtree's roots. Okay, so we know that Erdtree burial existed, but how can we know it meant no longer being able to return to life? I seem to only be able to locate one reference to this in the form of the hero's rune. The description states, "There were once heroes who walked the battlefields, abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself, who upon earning their honor, simply died." And so the inference that we can arrive at from all these descriptions is that assimilation into the Erdtree through burial was considered an honor, to be earned by great deeds, and resulted in being able to simply die. But what if the dark truth hidden away, the true shadow of the Erdtree, if you will, is that the Erdtree's initial birth required a massive number of deaths? It's clearly implied by in-game text that the Erdtree began in a state of flourishing, but wasn't able to maintain this, as shown by the descriptions of Erdtree Heal and the Blessed Dew Talisman. The Erdtree once flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life. It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became more an object of faith. So could Erdtree burial have been a lie perpetuated by the Golden Order as a way to receive a steady influx of nutrient-rich food, a way to keep the already withering tree from dying altogether? In any case, I think the connections between death and the Erdtree's growth seem solid. And it certainly isn't the only example we have in-game of a tree being fed and growing from the vital force of another and withering away without it. Which brings us to the second piece of evidence. We learn from several item descriptions that Miquella's Haligtree was grown on a diet of his own demigod blood. The Haligtree Knight Armor, for example, states that, though watered with Miquella's own blood since it was a sapling, the Haligtree ultimately failed to grow into an Erdtree. We're unfortunately never given an explicit reason for this failure, but we do learn this. At some point, Miquella enters into the Haligtree, into some sort of gestational slumber, where his life force is presumably slowly feeding the tree through its roots. But before Miquella's plan is finished, he's prematurely excised from the roots of the Haligtree by Mohg, leaving behind a gaping hole, causing it to wither, and become unable to reach its true potential as an Erdtree.
But with the Haligtree as it is, I suppose Miquella must already be. My apologies. Lost myself for a moment there. So, the Haligtree, now but a husk. I heard speculation Miquella embedded himself in the Haligtree. But, before he could finish, someone cut the tree open and absconded with his infant form. Indeed, it seems those words held weight. How vexing that the All-Knowing didn't have the full story. Perhaps the Queen's sorrow was justified.
This is further supported from the Haligtree crest shield, which depicts the Haligtree in an idealized form. Yet now, with the Haligtree misshapen, this wondrous rendition is a fleeting fantasy. While we do have to stay in the realm of speculation, it seems pretty safe to posit that had Miquella's plan gone to fruition, his slumbering body contained within the Haligtree would have fueled the growth of the tree into its ideal form, a new Erdtree. And thus the growth of Erdtrees being dependent on the absorption of vital energies is again further established. But if the Erdtree of the lands between didn't have a demigod inside it to make it grow, what did it have? Whatever it is probably close to the hidden meaning of the shadow of the Erdtree that Miyazaki referred to. Okay, so now that we are really in the thick of things, let's look at some final points of looser speculation. And while I must state that a lot of these last points could be coincidences or reaches, I find a lot of it to be really fun, so grab your tinfoil hats and let's go. First, let's talk again about the man in yellow, this robed figure from the trailer who has been impaled and has root-like spikes jutting out of his body. Could this be one of the earliest examples we have of someone being sacrificed to feed the growth of the Erdtree, or perhaps an early experiment of this process on a smaller scale? As pointed out by user Big Fat Bear, the brooch the man wears does bear some visual similarity to the items carried by the Erdtree burial watchdogs, these sort of repeating circles. So could the man in yellow have some connection to what later became the Erdtree burial traditions and the catacombs that kept the Erdtree fed? And if indeed our goal here is to uncover the secrets of the events that predate the Erdtree's birth, it also makes sense to look around Siofra and Ainsel, which is said to be the grave of civilizations that flourished before the Erdtree, and therefore could have witnessed how the Erdtree was born. Lamy 1 posits that these tablets, which depict robed monks not unlike the man in yellow, might represent such a moment. Notice the figures gathered around this central shape that seems to be blossoming upward, and terminates with the clear shape of a tree at the top. Is this meant to represent the birth of the Erdtree? And these stone tablets lead us to one last set of clues for us to talk about when discussing pre-Erdtree culture, the recurrence of spiraling pillars. These too are actually visible on the underground tablets, but that's certainly not the only place. Now I've seen many of these brought up by people too numerous to name, but I'm going to here try to provide a comprehensive list that brings them all together, and feel free to add on in the comments if I miss any. Okay, so first, there are some spiral pillars briefly visible during a few frames of the lion dance fight. Multiple spiral pillars are also visible on the mysterious unnamed structure in this shot here. In this painting of the man in yellow, the braids of the woman on the right seem to resemble a spiral pillar-like shape. And finally, there are two sets of spiral pillars that you can go and see for yourself right now, within Volcano Manor in Gelmir. One group of pillars is found in this chamber right before the Rykard fight. And another small set can be found on this snake altar within the church where you fight the Godskin Noble. And lastly, although they're a bit different, so I'm not sure if we should include them, there is some visual similarity with the pillars in Rykard's chamber itself, which have actual snakes coiling around them, and thus may give us a hint as to what the spiral motif could represent. So why would there be pre-Erdtree spiral pillars at Volcano Manor, which is seemingly a more modern structure? Well, there is some lore that could help explain this. For instance, we can glean some hints here from Rykard's magma hexes, which state that after discovering the ancient hexes of Gelmir, Rykard, son of Queen Renala, brought them back into practical use as new forms of sorcery. Rykard was clearly delving into the concealed and now frowned upon history of times past. So is it not possible that this exploration of ancient blasphemous fire spells and serpents could have led him to adopt some of this imagery and architectural motifs into the Volcano Manor? And I think this is especially lends some credibility when you consider that both blasphemous flames and snakes are prominent design themes of Mesmer the Impaler. And so concludes Lamy. Maybe with this DLC, we'll really learn about how the first cults and practices involving the Erdtree's initial stages, namely the Crucible, began to develop. Maybe we'll learn about how these civilizations discovered how to proficiently feed this tree, and how these developments went south, ending in a mass murder or the like, that assured the full growth of the tree, with its miraculous sap and all. In short, Queen Marika fed the entire lands between, with sap born from death. If I'm right. But what do you guys think? Could this be the hidden meaning of the shadow of the Erdtree that Miyazaki referred to in the interview? Is this perhaps all too much reaching on our part? I'm gonna say probably. But for me, it isn't about being proven right or wrong at the end of the day, but rather the process of trying to put it all together and the discussion that follows that makes this whole thing so fun. This is my longest video yet, guys, and between research, scripting, recording, and editing, it took a lot out of me to put this together. But if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and maybe consider supporting future content by becoming a member or patron. You guys are amazing, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks for the support, and I'll see you next time.